is an old friend of the Carter Center and a special friend of the Carters, and she's been a host in her association for many of President and Mrs. Carter's visits to China. She brings to this platform special knowledge of America. She was one of the first students to do graduate work here at UCLA, where she got her master's degree back in the 1980s. And so having her come back and give her perspective on this relationship is extremely important. To President Carter's right is Mary Brown Bullock. Professor Bullock is a distinguished professor at Emory University, but many of you know her as the president of Agnes Scott, where she was a graduate Phi Beta Kappa summa cum laude, or some such thing, Mary, in those days, and on to Stanford, where she got a PhD. My relationship with Mary goes back to the 1970s, because when I was at the Rockefeller Foundation and was interested in promoting U.S.-China relations. She was running the Committee on Scholarly Communication with the People's Republic of China, so her knowledge of the importance of people-to-people contact and exchanges runs very deep, and I hope that she can shed some light on that as well during the course of our conversation. And finally, to her right is our friend, and known to many of you, the director of our China program, Dr. Yawei Liu. He, as you know, is an expert on American history. He got his PhD from Emory in American history, but has been responsible for this wonderful program that we have here at the Carter Center. I was hoping that the screen would still be down so I could give imprint on your mind his website that is really a very, very valuable reference point for anyone who wants to check up on the internal discussions and the external commentary on China and its elections and politics and changes going on. It's called www.chinaelections.net. And if you make your homepage www.cartercenter.org, then you can always be in touch with all of our programs and then go and pick up on China elections. Now, this has been presented as a conversation. It really is kind of a misrepresentation in my mind, because it really is a seminar, and it's a seminar that is being led by President Jimmy Carter, who has been lecturing on China in his classes at Emory this week, and who, in fact, has a great deal to teach us. He was just not present at the creation of normalization 31 years ago, but he, along with Deng Xiaoping, as you know, was one of the creators. And I urge you, if you haven't already, and many of you have, I know, seen the photo exhibit, which Madam Lee and others were so gracious to put together and put on display around the U.S., but the photo exhibit shows the history of U.S.-China relations and then concentrates on how much has happened since President Carter and Deng Xiaoping were able to get normalization done. The normalization process is a comprehensive one. A lot of credit is rightly given to President Nixon for opening China, but let us not forget that was primarily a geostrategic calculation. That was tied up at the time of the Vietnam War. What President Carter did was to try to get our two countries moving together in a much more comprehensive way, our peoples together. And how far we have come in 30 years was so dramatically shown just 2 weeks ago when President Hu Jintao and President Obama signed a communique of no less than 4,000 words, covering the whole gamut of global, regional, bilateral, personal, human rights issues that make up this important bilateral relationship. And if you read the New York Times this morning on the reference of how China and America are holding the rest of the world, holding their breath, waiting to see how we two countries approach the Copenhagen Conference on Climate Change. And I'm sure there'll be some questions on that along the way. But there's more to this relationship by President Carter than the normalization and what he did as president. If you go and look at the museum that has been so brilliantly and beautifully renovated recently, the Presidential Museum, you get a flavor of the China connections that go back to his very boyhood, a time when China was run by warlords, and his interest and compassion and interest in the Chinese people began right through being a young naval officer and into his post-presidency, most recently a week or so ago when he and Mrs. Carter were over building houses in China for Habitat on Humanity. It's a reminder to all of us that in different ways we can contribute to improving U.S.-China relations and mutual understanding. This is not just the business of presidents. However, governments provide the enabling environment that allow for us citizens to act. So I'd like to begin tonight's discussion with the decision to normalize relations. How was it done? What were the politics behind